1274 BCE, the banks of the Orontes River, two of the most powerful armies the ancient world would ever see stand within striking distance. We expect chaos, a single decisive clash, shields breaking, chariots colliding, history turning in one violent afternoon. But that isn't what happened. Instead, the greatest battle of the late Bronze Age ended not with destruction but with something far more unsettling. Two empires faced each other and realized neither could truly win. The Battle of Kadesh is remembered for chariots and kings, but its real legacy was something very different. It quietly redefined what it meant to wage war and what it meant to end one. Welcome to the channel. Here we explore turning points in history, not just the battles and the names, but the systems beneath them. Moments when leaders were forced to think beyond pride. Moments when victory was not simply about who fought harder but who understood the world they lived in. Today, we step into the late Bronze Age, and into a battlefield that refused to give the story people expected. On the surface, this is a story about the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II facing the Hittite king Muwatalli II. Two superpowers, one city, one battle. But that is not the real question. This isn't just about which army won. It's about why this massive clash with tens of thousands of soldiers and the finest chariot corps of the age did not end with total conquest. Why did two empires capable of enormous destruction choose diplomacy instead of annihilation? And why did this moment become the foundation for something the ancient world almost never produced, a formal written peace treaty between equals? To understand that, we have to go backward long before the chariots began to roll toward Kadesh. The centuries before the battle were defined by expansion. Egypt, under the new kingdom, had grown rich from the Nile and confident from victories in Canaan and Nubia. Its pharaohs saw themselves not only as rulers, but as divine anchors of order. Territory beyond Egypt's borders meant security, tribute, and control of trade routes feeding goods into the Nile Valley. To the north, the Hittite Empire had risen in Anatolia. It was not built overnight. It grew through treaties, vassal states, and disciplined administration of lands far from its capital at Hut. The Hittites controlled the mountain passes, the timber, the metal, and the highland roads leading toward Syria. Between these two worlds lay the real prize, the cities of Syria. They were not empty battlegrounds. They were economic arteries, trade hubs linking Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Whoever held them controlled movement and wealth. Kadesh was one of these nodes. Over decades, borders shifted. Cities declared loyalty, defected, returned, or were taken by force. Diplomacy, marriage alliances, and threats were constant. Kings exchanged letters written on clay tablets negotiating marriages, gold shipments, and the treatment of vassal rulers. The late Bronze Age was not chaotic improvisation. It was a system. Empires existed not as isolated forces but as interdependent powers linked by trade and diplomacy and by the knowledge that total war could damage the very network they depended on. When Ramesses II came to the throne, he inherited both ambition and pressure. He needed to prove military strength. He needed to hold the empire his predecessors had built. And he needed to send a signal not only to the Hittites, but to the city-states watching carefully from the sidelines. Muwatalli too faced a mirror problem. He was defending a sphere of influence stretching deep into Syria. Losing Kadesh would not just be a military setback. It could unravel Hittite authority among vassals, encouraging rebellion and inviting foreign intervention. So both sides moved, not impulsively, not recklessly, but because the system they lived in made confrontation almost inevitable. The decisive moment did not begin on the battlefield, it began with information. Ramesses II advanced north with his army divided into 4 corps, Amen, Ra, Ptah, and Set. He believed Kadesh was vulnerable. He believed the Hittite army was far away. He believed because he was told so. 2 Shasu Bedouins were captured and interrogated. They reported that the Hittites were still north, days away. Ramesses accepted it. It was a decision and a risk, because Muwatalli II was not far away at all. He was already near Kadesh, concealed behind the city with a large Hittite force and thousands of chariots. The misinformation was deliberate. The Hittite king had allowed the Egyptians to receive exactly the intelligence he wanted them to believe. The turning point was not when chariots charged. It was when one ruler acted on flawed information and the other ruler built a plan around creating that flaw, cause and effect quietly shaping what would follow. Ramesses marched ahead with his Amen corps separated from most of his army. The Pate division lagged far to the south. The Ra division was still stretched along the road. The Hittites saw their moment. Discipline met opportunity. When the Hittite chariots struck the Ra division, it did not look like the opening of a glorious set-piece battle. It looked like collapse. Columns were broken. Panic rippled through the Egyptian ranks. The Hittite force pushed through the camp, smashing into the unprepared Egyptian center. The Egyptians were not standing in perfect formation. They were marching, setting camp, managing logistics, and suddenly fighting for survival. For Ramesses, this was not a stage for heroic display. It was a problem of control, something he valued above all. Order had fractured. He rallied what forces he could. Egyptian counterattacks and the arrival of reinforcing elements helped stabilize the situation. The battle became a struggle not between champions but between systems, formations, command structure, and the ability to recover from surprise. Muwatalli too faced discipline of his own kind. He had inflicted shock, but he did not overextend recklessly. His chariots were powerful but vulnerable if trapped. He had infantry across the river that would take time to commit. His goal was not suicidal pursuit. It was to break Egyptian presence, not destroy his own army in the process. Both leaders made choices defined by restraint as much as aggression. The Hittites had delivered a devastating ambush. The Egyptians had avoided total collapse, and as the hours passed, something became clear. Neither side could transform this into the decisive, crushing victory that late Bronze Age kings carved into monuments. By the end, both sides claimed success. Egyptian inscriptions present Ramesses as the lone hero holding the line. Hittite accounts emphasize tactical advantage and Egyptian withdrawal. Each narrative served political needs at home. But beneath the propaganda, the strategic reality was simple. Neither empire was destroyed, neither gained permanent control of all Syrian territory. Kadesh remained contested ground. The battle showed the limits of late Bronze Age power. Armies were enormous and sophisticated, supported by supply depots, messengers, and logistical planning. But they were still bound by terrain, distances, and the fragile nature of coalition forces. Total conquest was not easy. A decisive knockout blow between superpowers was not guaranteed, even with thousands of troops in the field. The result was not just a military stalemate, it was a psychological one. Both kings understood that repeating Kadesh again and again would bleed resources, destabilize vassal states, and invite new rivals into the vacuum. Victory was not simply about winning a charge. It was about sustaining an empire for decades afterward, and this is where the real importance of Kadesh appears. Years after the battle, the Egyptians and Hittites did something extraordinary for their time. They did not escalate, they negotiated. They concluded what historians often call the first known recorded peace treaty between great powers. It was written in two languages. It recognized each side as legitimate and sovereign. It included clauses on mutual defense, extradition of fugitives, and commitments not to attack each other's lands. In other words, it treated war not as a personal contest between kings, but as a problem within a larger system that needed stability to function. The late Bronze Age world relied on trade routes, diplomatic marriages, and the exchange of goods and ideas across thousands of kilometers. The treaty reflected an understanding that endless war damaged not only armies, but the very structure that kept both empires wealthy. Kadesh did not redefine tactics, it redefined expectations. It showed that even in an age of chariots and divine kingship, there were limits, and that powerful rulers could choose cooperation not out of idealism, but because the system they lived in demanded it. The battle became part of a larger transition, from episodic warfare toward structured diplomacy between equals. Future states would build on this logic, formalizing borders, treaties, and the concept that peace could be written, signed, and enforced, not because rulers were kinder, but because reality forced them to think beyond the next charge. The Battle of Kadesh is often remembered for its chariots, its kings, and its inscriptions carved deep into temple walls. But its real legacy lies in what did not happen. There was no complete destruction of an empire, no permanent occupation of Syria, no runaway conquest that reshaped the map overnight. Instead, there was recognition, hard, reluctant, but transformative, that superpowers could fight without winning completely, and then choose to negotiate rather than bleed themselves dry. War, in that moment, did not simply end, it evolved. If you enjoyed this story and want more turning points where history refused to follow the script we expect, let me know in the comments. Which moment should we explore next? Like the video if it helped you see this event differently. Subscribe if you want more calm/in-depth storytelling about the systems that shaped our past. And remember, history rarely changes in a single clash. It changes when leaders realize that the world around them has already changed and they must decide whether to follow.